Good evening, and welcome to this evening's program on Jumpstarting Your Spring Vegetable Garden. I'm Dina Henshin, Branch Manager at Middleburg Library, and your host tonight. Please feel free to send me your comments and questions during the program by using the chat feature, and I will relay them to Denise at the end of the program. Denise Palmer started her serious adventures in vegetable gardening many years ago by joining the VCE Loudoun Master Gardeners. She gave countless lectures to the residents of Loudoun County, inspiring them to plant and maintain a vegetable garden. Her depth of knowledge concerning vegetables is expansive. She focuses on practical and proven methods which bring success. Since bringing her skills to North Carolina, she continues to pursue her passion for the vegetable garden by being part of the North Carolina Extension Master Gardener program. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Dina, and welcome to all of you. If you're familiar with me, then you already know that vegetables are my jam. Other people, when January rolls around, may be thinking about the flowers. I'm thinking about my vegetables, and so that is what I love to teach people. It's what I like to come across and encourage. And educates people on how to maintain a vegetable garden in whatever way you can do that. We all can't have, quarter-acre plots or raised beds. Sometimes it's just containers that we can do, but certainly it is something that I always encourage. Yes, now I live in North Carolina. I live in central North Carolina, and I don't know. It's been cold. It has been cold here. I think in Northern Virginia, you've got a little weather up there as well during the winter time. So we are actually waiting for spring to arrive here. We get little snatches of it. And when they come, I go. And I'm still trying to get my spring peas into the vegetable garden. As we speak, usually I have them heat in central North Carolina, but this year has brought its challenges upon us, especially with the cold and the winds. So tonight, what we're basically going to do is we're going to go through the basic functions of a vegetable garden. I'll be adding some things to it. For those of you who are experienced vegetable gardeners, my hope is that you pick up a thing or two. And for those that are new to the vegetable garden, some of the information may seem overwhelming, but you just take out and pick out what you can. And then, vegetable gardening is around the corner, certainly. So I think, there we go. So if you're a new vegetable gardener, and even as an experienced vegetable gardener, each January I ask myself, well, what is it I'm going to grow? I don't have a lot of space, simply because I'm getting a little older. Things are getting a little harder to do. And so even though I could have a much broader vegetable garden like I dreamed of when I was in my 30s and 40s, I have found that vegetable gardening, especially down here, can be challenging because we have to do so much water during the summertime. So each January I say, well, what do I want to dedicate my space to this year? And every year, I guess every 3 years, I like to change things up a little bit. But if you're going for economic value in homegrown vegetables, the vegetables that I've listed there are the best, especially your herbs. If you use herbs in your cooking or for some other things, you already know herbs can be pretty expensive, and those things that we find in the grocery store down here are pretty sad. So I actually do a lot more herbs down here. Because I use a lot of them, and I just find that I can't find the quality that I'm looking for. So certainly herbs are a bigger part of my garden here in central North Carolina. I love all of the basics there, and I grow all of them. What I don't have space for, though, because you can buy them pretty cheaply in the grocery store, are onions and potatoes. Now, I have experimented when I was in Northern Virginia. I was a container garden there towards the end, and I grew potatoes in containers. They did well, no problem. They're pretty easy to grow. Get 3 or 4 meals out of them. And if that's all you're looking for, then I encourage you to experiment with potatoes because they are pretty easy to grow. Now, with potatoes, you do want to get your seed stock. Potatoes, a lot of people like to go to the grocery store and maybe get some older potatoes and then, they've Googled something. My caution, if you're going to grow potatoes and you're going to go to the grocery store to get them, is understand that a lot of those potatoes have been treated so that they don't sprout. In addition, they could carry viruses or diseases. So whenever possible, I encourage you to buy seed potatoes, and all of the stores have seed potatoes in the stores right now. Your big box retailers. I was out looking the other day and I saw seed potatoes in there. So you can procure those. There are many things online which can tell you how to grow them in a smaller space. But I can buy mine pretty cheaply in the grocery store right now. So I just leave that because to me, it would just be something else I need to water when watering comes around, which it always comes around down here because our ground is sand. Vegetables which are better homegrown, but growing smaller yields because of special care. Artichokes, cauliflower, celery, eggplant. Now, I'm an eggplant fan, and I do grow eggplant and have grown eggplant for many years. I have found in my experience that growing eggplants in a container, which is about 3 foot to 4 foot off the ground, is the best way to grow them because of the flea beetle issues which come about. Flea beetles will decimate your eggplants and you're going to have a sad little heart. So I grow mine in a container. I actually grow 3 of them in a container off the ground, about 3 foot high, and I have great success growing them that way. And unfortunately, my husband is not such an eggplant fan, so I end up eating most of them. But I like eggplant. I think there's a lot you can do with it. Head lettuce, like an iceberg lettuce. Normally it just takes too long and it gets too hot before that head lettuce will actually come to fruition, where you get that head like, oh yeah, this is like the grocery store. No, it's a little harder than that. Cauliflower in the springtime is hard as well, simply because of the heat. Broccoli, cabbage are easier to grow in the springtime, but cauliflower can be difficult to grow because, we get these fluctuations in temperatures. One day it can be 45 degrees, the next day it could be 85 degrees. And so cauliflower doesn't take those fluctuations in temperature very well during the springtime. And then, of course, we may set in just to be hot. Last year, certainly we burned up down here. Besides, we had a little bit of drought. And so I'm just not going to hedge my bets on cauliflower during the springtime. Instead, I'm going to put that in my fall garden. If you have limited space, choose vegetables which are more expensive in the grocery store. I am a pepper fan, have been. I used to be the pepper czar there with the Master Gardeners there in Loudoun County. So I love to eat peppers, all kinds of peppers, and so I grow a lot of them here because peppers can be expensive to buy. If space is a concern, then I advise you to grow your herbs in pots or containers to conserve the space in your actual vegetable garden if you're growing in raised beds. So what kinds of, there's all kinds. You can grow in containers, you can grow in raised beds. You can grow in ornamental beds, commonly called edible landscaping. With edible landscaping, it can work, but understand oftentimes you're growing vegetables amongst perennials and annuals, and those perennials and annuals have their own unique requirements. So certainly if you plan out a bed or buy a good book on how to do it, it can be done. I just caution you to throw like a tomato in the middle of your perennial bed and and have high hopes that it's going to do real well. Oftentimes, insects that are on the perennials and the annuals will come to your tomatoes, and or the soil is inappropriate for tomatoes versus your annuals and perennials. If you can find a community garden space, great for you. When trees shaded out my backyard, I was at Ida Lee growing in the community garden there. And that is also, you know, you've got to improve the soil, and we'll go into soil improvement here in a little bit. But every year, you know, you had to improve your soil unless you got your same space back and you knew what you'd done the year before. And then for those who have the time and the means, you know, certainly a plot of land, which was sort of the original kind of gardening. You know, we were raised on farms and we had a plot of land. I was raised on a farm in Iowa, so we had a plot of land, and you know, we had 2 quarter-acre gardens, and that was massive. There's various methods of vegetable garden you may hear if you're looking up vegetable gardening online. The kitchen or potager garden. Of course, kitchen gardens were very popular amongst in the 1700s and the 1800s. If you go to many of the older homesteads, generally you're going to see a kitchen type of garden, but it's usually set apart by fences or other hardscape. And it includes ornamentals, but mostly vegetables and herbs that you can go outside your kitchen and garden with. I am a fan of small space gardening methods. I think to myself, I don't need a 1/4 acre because I can grow what I want using intensive garden methods. Vertical garden, when I was in Northern Virginia, vertical garden because I had very limited space in my suburban backyard. And a lot of my stuff was grown vertically. It was grown up on trellises. And that's how I got what I wanted to grow successfully rather than the sprawl that you might typically think on a plot of land. I also do succession planting. So I have a 3-season garden here. I had a 3-season garden in Northern Virginia. I grew spring, summer, and fall. That takes planning, but when something was done in the spring, then the summer planting goes in. When the summer plantings are done, the fall plantings can go in. So in this time of the year where we're getting our seeds and we're looking at the seed racks and things of that nature, think about that. Think, well, hey, do I want to plant something in the fall? Maybe some turnips or some collards or something of that, because collards are, again, one of those vegetables that grow best in the fall because of you're not getting the high temperatures. They can be grown in the summertime, but so I'm always thinking, you know, what am I going to do after this? Square foot gardening. Square foot gardening is how I learned actually to garden in Northern Virginia. I came to Northern Virginia. I had very little space in my suburban backyard, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? And it was actually, I was introduced to the Master Gardeners, and it was actually their idea to say, hey, why don't you try square foot gardening? Many books, online presences, but that's really how I learned to garden in such a small space. And then, of course, raised beds. I have always grown in raised beds simply because your soil is just for the most part, too bad. So when I was in Northern Virginia, it was clay, it was rock, it was everything you didn't want. Having said that, I would give my left foot for clay soil again, because here I live in the sand hills and everything is sand, even though we have no beach. So I have found out quickly what gardening in the sand means. It means a lot more work. I'll just say that. So, maybe you're just thinking about it, or maybe you thought about this in January, but what is it you want to grow? What's your family going to eat? Like I say, I take up some space growing eggplant, but my husband's not really a fan of it. But it's something I like, but it does take up some space. It's something I need to maintain. So there's lots of, you go to the seed packets in the stores, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get this and this and this. And then you come home and you're like, oh, what have I done? What have I done? Um, so, be sort of, give yourself a box and list out what exactly you would want to grow. And then what is your family going to eat? Because certainly you want your family to eat what you've grown. Um, Design your space, design it, draw it out, write in where stuff is going to go. Your seed packets or online planners can certainly help you determine how much space you're going to need for a particular vegetable. When I was growing in 4x8 beds, uh, to be quite honest, you can only grow two heirloom tomatoes, and that's even pushing it a little bit. If you have one 4x8 bed, if you're going to grow an heirloom tomato, you're going to have to do probably some selective pruning of that tomato so it doesn't get out of hand. But write in where your variety is going to grow, because you don't want to just crowd everything in there. They're going to shade each other, and then you're probably going to have some rots, and you're going to have vegetables that may not do that well. Also plan out your taller vegetables. If you've got heirloom tomatoes that are going to get 6 to 8 foot tall, maybe even taller, are they in front of your peppers, which aren't going to get so much sun? And if they don't get a lot of sun, well, what happens is they're not going to grow very well. They're not going to fruit very well. The plant may do well, but the fruit itself may not be that great. And then think about, is it spring or is it a summer vegetable? Spring vegetables are leafy greens, I like to call them, our lettuces, our spinaches, our all those yummy things that we love to eat in the spring that says spring. Spring vegetables would be radishes and some of the and spring peas, whether it's snap peas or snow peas or English peas. Here, now I'm going to tell you, here everybody thinks I'm a little weird for trying to grow them because we are a little bit warmer down here, although not all that much. But they're like, you just wasting your time doing that. And it's just something I'm not going to give up. I love my peas, so I'm going to give it a shot. Granted, I probably get 2 or 3 harvests out of them before the heat finally gets them. But, again, something I'm willing to use space for because I love spring peas. Instead of rows, which is you got to go rows and they got to be straight, plant in sections. Section out your beds, and then just plant in sections so that you can fit a little of this in, maybe a little of that in, and you can get more production out of your vegetable bed. Again, don't forget to include the herbs and your companion plants. Now I will caution you, herbs for the most part are pretty good within your vegetable bed. But when we go to planting companion plants, I do have a note that you really should plant I have calendula, and some of the other herbs, you may want to consider planting them at the edge of your beds. What can sometimes happen is these are great companion plants. They bring in bad pests, they bring in good pests, but sometimes those bad pests will find your vegetables pretty tasty as well. So I always advise that if you're planting herbs or planting companion plants, that you plant them at the edge, or that you plant them in the perimeter. If you have a a perennial garden around your vegetable garden, plant those kinds of things in there if they're companion, like a marigold or a calendula. The herbs, they're fine for the most part, but I always plant them at the edge, not mixed into my vegetables. Another thing is don't plant your garden all at once. So don't go out there on, so here our supposed frost-free date is April 12th, although that is a blatant lie because we've had frost down here on Mother's Day. In Northern Virginia, I think your frost-free date is about Mother's Day. It may have gone down a little bit at the 1st of May because they've changed hardiness zones. But, you know, don't go out there on April 12th and just plant everything, your spring stuff, your summer stuff, and hey, it's done. It's one and done. Because things probably aren't going to do very well. You know, I need to be planting my spring garden in March. In Northern Virginia, your spring garden is typically planted in March and in April. And then your summer vegetables are typically planted in May and June. You know, we all have phones with calendars, so we can put our little reminders on our phones to, hey, now it's time to get this into the garden. So you're doing a little bit at a time rather than, hey, let's get it all done. And then it's just going to be like wonderful. It may not be wonderful. You know, do a little bit at a time. It's much more enjoyable. If you need help planning your garden, there's plenty of garden planners out there that can help you. I think there's even more than I have listed here now. Everybody seems to be into helping you plan your garden because they want you to buy your seeds from them. So when you're thinking about, well, you know, what kind of seed or what kind of plant do I really want to go? Because, you know, the choice is major. I mean, I've seen, you know, deer in the headlight people standing at a seed rack going, I have no idea what I want. And so again, this goes to planning and what you're looking for. And if you're looking at a seed packet, you're going to come across 3 different kinds of seeds or even plants. If you're buying a transplant at one of your local box stores when it's time to plant, generally they come about in April and May. It's a hybrid. Is it open pollinated? Is it an heirloom? So a hybrid seed is planted the first year. It does what it's supposed to do, unless you've had problems. But you cannot save the seeds. So on a seed packet, you're going to know a hybrid because it says F1, F2, and you know immediately that's a hybrid. But open pollinated, on the other hand, means that it's a seed. You can grow the vegetable, you can save the seeds, and then the next year you can plant those seeds and it will be the same plant. In a hybrid, you don't exactly know what you're going to get because it may resort to one of the parent plants. Now, an heirloom is an open pollinated plant. A lot of people like, I've got this heirloom tomato, especially tomatoes. Heirlooms are big in the tomato thing. I will agree that heirloom tomatoes have some of the best taste. But when you're planning your garden, do not plan for all your tomatoes to be heirloom because your little heart's going to get broken because heirlooms don't have some of the resistance to disease and pest that a hybrid would have. And you'd say that's why we want to do a hybrid seed, because hybrid seeds are crosses between 2 parent plants of the same variety. Let's say we're talking about a tomato. So 2 tomatoes which have been crossed for a specific reason. Either they have pest resistance, they have disease resistance, or maybe they're more drought tolerant, where an open pollinated heirloom may not have those qualities. So when we're talking tomato plants, I always say you can have your heirloom, but always buy a hybrid one too. That way, you're like, hedging your bets that you're going to have tomatoes. My little heart's been broken before growing all heirlooms. I will tell you that. So on a seed packet, it should have the plant description, days to maturity, which are important. It's sort of summer requirements and the date it was packaged. Now, I will say in today's world that some of that may not be true. I've seen some seed packets lately where it looks like printing is too much money these days, and they just tell you to look online. So, which kind of frustrates me. I'm thinking it didn't take that much more money to give me the information I need. So if you don't find it, then go to whoever the maker of the seed or the purveyor of the seed is, and go to their website, because they will have the information on the website. If you buy a little seed packet, I don't use that many seeds. My garden is a little bit smaller. So, usually I can keep my seeds for 3, 4, 5 years. Although, again, in today's world, they are packaging seeds. Like I may get 10 seeds in a tomato variety, or I may get X amount. So they're packaging them in smaller quantities, which is good for me. But when I go to the next year thinking I have seeds and I realize, oh, I don't have those seeds, it just is a reminder that I need to check every January what I have. Now, they're usually good for more than 1 year, generally 3 to 5 years when they're kept in a cool and dark location, preferably below 50 degrees. Some people like to put them in a Ziploc bag in the refrigerator. I don't do that. I keep mine in a box with some of those desiccants in a dark place, and I have pretty good luck keeping my seeds like that. Now, when you buy transplants for your garden, you're at the store, you're looking at plants, and you're like, I got to get a transplant. And in transplants, normally we're buying our transplants in tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, trying to think what else, but those plants, if you buy the seed, you've got to start them inside before they go into the garden. So if your frost-free date, let's say, is May 10th, your transplant probably should have been your seed probably should have been started in March. And then by time May 10th comes around, when it's time to plant in the garden, that summer vegetable, you've got a plant, and that's called a transplant. And at that point, that is what your maturity date is going for. So I grow all my own transplants here at my house. I have a grow rack. Some of mine, because of my particular area, some of my transplants or my seeds were started in January, and they'll be ready to go into our frost-free date in North Carolina, which is supposed to be April 20th. If you're buying a transplant in a store, and most people do, everybody wants the plant that has a fruit on it. Can I just say, don't do that? Because what you want to do is get that transplant into your garden. You do not want it fruiting. You do not want it flowering, because you want to get it into your garden, plant it. You want it to start putting down roots. You want it to grow before it starts fruiting. If it's already blooming, just yank those little blooms off. If it already has fruit on it, take those little fruits off, because when you transplant that transplant into your garden, it's going to be in shock, but it needs to establish a good root system first. You'll get your tomatoes, you'll get your peppers when you're supposed to. But over and over, I see people, I want the one with the fruit on. No, you really don't. You really want a short, compact, green transplant. And if they have fruit on, or if they have blooms on, yank them off before you transplant them into your garden. Avoid root-bound plants, which means the root is circling the pot. You know, if that plant's been sitting around for a couple of months, you know, that plant is old and it probably is not going to be all it can be, because it's been sitting in that pot. The roots have been circling and circling and circling. So avoid those as well. Check your leaves and your stems for insects or pests. And really these are things for any plant that you would buy. I mean, you don't want to bring home an insect to your gardens, because it could be an insect that you don't have, and then you've bought catastrophe down. And for disease, if it has diseased leaves, you know, sometimes as master gardeners, we're like, oh yeah, we'll take that $1 plant because we can save it. But what we need to stop and think is that $1 plant could be bringing havoc to our gardens if we try to save it by bringing it home and saying, oh, this was so cheap, this is so cheap. Well, okay, let's see how this works out. And if you buy your tomatoes or your peppers or your basil before May, you may need to repot those, because they really shouldn't go in the ground until you have your frost-free day. And the local extension can tell you, the master gardeners there can tell you when that frost-free day. It used to be Mother's Day. I'm not sure, in some areas I think have warmed up there. So check with the master gardeners as to what your frost-free day is. But even then, even if it's supposed to be a frost-free day, you know, you could still have some cold nights, and you may have to go out and, you know, throw a light sheet over them to protect them. So another thing to think about is, if you got a little bit of space, is rotation. We don't want the same type of vegetable growing in the same space year after year after year. And the reason behind that is because you have a vegetable, they have insect issues, they have disease issues, and you don't want to, you know, sort of foster that vegetable's issues in one place year after year, because frankly, if you grow tomatoes in this bed one year, you grow tomatoes in the same bed the next year, your tomato crop and your tomato production may go down, because in that same space, the insects are like, hey, the tomato's back, yay, or usually with tomatoes, it's disease. And so we want to practice rotation when we can. Now, in small spaces, it is difficult to do. But if you have, let's take in this example, I have 3 4x8 beds, and you can see how I have rotated things around with the different vegetables growing in there and what could conceivably fit in these beds. So each year we want to say bed 1 grew tomatoes, bed 2, let's say, grew our squash, bed 3 grew our lettuce and our greens, and then the next year we're going to rotate them around. And so rotation is very good. It keeps the pest and it keeps the disease guessing. And it also, you have to remember, a tomato is taking the same nutrients out of the soil. It needs the same nutrients year after year after year after year after year. Of course, you're fertilizing, but you're also taking those micronutrients out. So if you rotate to another bed where those micronutrients haven't been taken out, then you're also more likely to have success with production or have a bigger production. So crop rotation, very important. So if you're a new vegetable gardener, you might be saying, well, all right, where can I put one of these beds in? And we always want it to be close to the house, if possible. And I laugh at that because my vegetable beds right now are about 250 foot from my house. And I'm gonna tell you right now, in July, in August, That's a long way because it gets hot and it gets humid. And so we're slogging out there about 5 o'clock. And I affectionately call my backyard here Death Valley because it is hot. Um, and so we're slogging out there, going to find whatever it is we need to find for dinner that evening. I didn't have much of a choice. That's just where my vegetable beds had to go. But if you have a choice, put the vegetable bed closer to your house, because it's going to be easier to water, it's going to be easier to check on, and it's going to be so much nicer when it's hot. When we're talking sun exposure, many times people, in my experience, don't understand how much sun you need to have for your vegetables. So when we're talking summer vegetables, you need to have 8 hours. You need to have 8 hours of sun if you want those vegetables to fruit. So your tomatoes, your peppers, your squash, you want 8 hours of sun for those vegetables. 6 hours for your leafy greens, your onions, carrots. They don't need so much. If you're just building a new bed, your max orientation is going to be north to south. And right now is the time to be observing for sunlight. Because why? We don't have all the leaves on the trees. So, when all the leaves come on, you might realize, oh, wow, I don't have as much sun as I thought I had. So right now, observe for your sunlight, see where your sunlight is. And then as these leaves start coming on the trees in the next month, month and a half, you might notice, oh, maybe I don't have sun there. So now is a good time to scope it out for the sunlight and see where it might fit into your backyard. Soil, pH. pH, what is that? Well, it's something you need to know about. So the Master Gardeners have soil test kits, which they'll only be happy to give you so that you can test your soil. 6.2 is the ideal. However, if your soil is 7.3, like mine is right now, I can still grow vegetables, but I'm working on getting that pH down. And again, the Master Gardeners can sort of tell you how you can do that. But if you don't know what your pH of your soil is, it is one of the most important things that you do need to know. So go by the extension office or hit one of their help desk and pick up a soil test kit so it can be sent off and you can know what your pH is. And I say pH is important because in a vegetable garden, 6.2, 7, we're good with that. But like, let's say you wanted to grow blueberries. 6.2, you're not growing any blueberries in 6.2. Blueberries want 4.5 or 5. So that's why I say pH is very important to know. If you have black walnut trees or other trees nearby, they should be about 60 foot away from your vegetable bed. So black walnut trees have a chemical, it's called jungle, and it will keep certain vegetables from growing. So specifically black walnut trees have this chemical. Other trees though, like I said, right now you might say, oh, my whole yard is sunlight. Wait for those maples to leaf out. And also those tree roots are going to take nutrients and water away from your vegetables. In my suburban backyard there in Northern Virginia, we lived there 25 years and we planted maples, about 20, when we first moved. But by the time we were done, those tree roots had grown through my vegetable beds and through just about every part of my backyard. So, try to site away from large trees, a vegetable bed. Don't put in drainage channels. It's going to get washed away. I would think one of the most important things is make sure you have a source of water nearby. It gets hot and it gets heavy if you have to slug water out to your garden. Make sure that you have some kind of water that you can readily get to. Buy hoses now because you're going to need them. And be ready. How am I going to water this thing when it needs to be watered. A relatively level area, free from rocks, although you may not be able to avoid that. Don't put it on top of a hill necessarily. The wind will just whip those little vegetables to no end. And so if you have a choice, try not to do it on top of the hill. And then space, seriously consider what your space constraints are. Especially if you're a new vegetable gardener. I always tell new vegetable gardeners straight off, hey, listen, whatever you got in your head, cut it in half, because I want you to be successful. And, we all have these ideas, like I'm gonna do this and this is, but, if you're new and you're not quite sure what you're into, whatever those ideas are in your head, cut them in half, and that's what you're gonna start with. Start small and then add as you gain experience. You will have success rather than just plant this mega thing. Everything doesn't go well. Maybe most things don't go well. And then you say, well, I'm not a vegetable gardener. How many times have I heard people say, well, you know what? I can't just grow houseplants. Can't do it. I'm not a houseplant grower. Well, maybe because, you got to look at your considerations, but maybe you got too many. Maybe you started out too big. And if you were just started with one or two, maybe things would have gone better. Maybe that's just me, though. Other considerations, you got wildlife, got some rabbits, got some groundhogs, got some, I don't know. My house in Northern Virginia, I had everything, and I lived in the suburbs. Here, not so much, but we do have moles. Dogs, cats will also get into vegetable gardens. More than once I've heard somebody come and say, they had their spring garden planted, their lettuce started coming up, it was going to be great, and then they went out, and then they saw nothing because the little rabbits got it. So, although I joke about it, you've got to protect your stuff straight off. Right now, around my bed for my lettuce and my peas, I've got chicken wire I'm stapling on to the side of the bed to keep the rabbits and the rabbits and whatever else wants to get at that stuff out of my beds. The first year with this vegetable garden here, I thought I was smarter than them. I'm like, nah, I haven't seen any rabbits. I'll be darned if I just didn't go out there one day and there was a rabbit just as proud as he could be, just eating my lettuce to no end. I was mad. Anyway, I got chased out of my bed and I learned my lesson. Got some chicken wire, staple it to the side of my fence, and staple it to the side of my bed, and we have kept the rabbits out since. So when we talk about soil is the most important component. I've talked a lot about seeds and plants, but I want to tell you right now, soil is your most important component in a vegetable garden. So us master gardeners, being master gardeners, we call it soil, right? And other people call it dirt. They make fun of us all the time. But so why do we say soil? Because soil is a living entity to us. It has microorganisms in it, which nourish the soil, which keep the soil viable. Dirt's what you get on your pants when you kneel down in the garden. If you're, first-time gardener, not sure what it can be very confusing about. I need what? So garden soil in your big box stores, you often see bags and they're called garden soil. So garden soil would be appropriate, unless it says otherwise on the label. Always read your labels. Unless it says otherwise, garden soil is appropriate to use in a raised bed for vegetables. Compost. Compost is good, but we never ever want to grow all in compost, because compost just doesn't have the necessary heft to support our plants. Compost is mainly used as a fertilizer, or if you're starting a new bed, You might use half topsoil and half compost to fill up a new bed, but we would never use all compost. It's simply too light to support our plants. Topsoil is topsoil. If you live in a development, then you don't have any topsoil because they took it all away from you. So you're going to have to go buy it. But topsoil is exactly what it says. If new garden, use half compost, half topsoil. Potting soil. Potting soil should not be used in a raised bed situation. Potting soil is for containers. It's very light. Generally, it has a lot of nutrients in it, but it's specifically manufactured to use in containers. So we always want to have plenty of organic matter in our soil, in our vegetable soils. And organic matter is, all kinds of stuff. It's all kinds of good stuff. And we want to have a healthy soil. So when we have a healthy soil, we have lots of organic matter in that soil. Organic matter comes from what? Well, it can come from a number of things. It can come from compost. Compost is completely composted of organic matter, and it's usable immediately. Organic matter can be chopped up leaves that you stored last winter or last fall. They're chopped up, they've composted, and so they're ready to be turned into soil. So there's any number of items that can be considered organic matter. When we're in the springtime, though, and we're adding it to our soil, we want to make sure that it's completely broken down. Because if it's not broken down, what's going to happen is it's going to take nutrients away from our vegetables. And because it's still trying to break down, it's going to take nutrients away from our vegetables. So our vegetables may not be so happy. So we go on organic matter. When is it appropriate to put organic matter into the soil, into your vegetable garden? Well, certainly it's springtime. And organic compost should be going into your vegetable garden. If you were making the vegetable garden in the fall, you would have the option to put in things like chopped up leaves, decomposed straw, any number of things, because you have months for it to break down in the soil before springtime when you want to plant in the soil. If you're starting a new vegetable garden in the ground, consider what was there before. Down here, we have a sort of a unique situation because a lot of the land has very old buildings on it. And so we run across some schools, and I'll say, well, how old is that school? And that'd be like 1946. And I'm like, oh, this is not Northern Virginia anymore. And I'm like, no, we really need to consider, was there lead paint on the school? Does anybody know what was on this soil before? And all kinds of considerations down here, where when I was in Northern Virginia, most of the schools were new, and we didn't have that consideration. But if you're going to put a vegetable garden in the ground, consider what was there before. And if your ground is too hard, then consider raised beds. Flat out consider raised beds. I'm a raised bed fan. You can build it with any number of materials. Just don't use telephone poles or railroad ties. And again, heads up, when you move to central North Carolina, they got lots of railroad ties laying around here. And I've cautioned a few people here. No, we're not going to use them because they have creosote in them. And that's creosote still leaches years and years and years after. That's why they last so long. We talked about pH of your soil and then soil organic matter. Always go to your vegetable garden in the springtime and say, hey, what do I got to do to get this soil ready for my vegetables? And one of the things should be is putting in organic matter. And then this is just some instructions, some basic instructions, which I'm sure you can get online. about building a raised bed on sod or lawn. Should be at least 6 inches high. If you're building a raised bed, that's the one thing I'm going to highlight on that. If it's a lawn and you put herbicides down, you may want to not build there right now, allow the herbicides to break down. But these are, pretty basic instructions you can find online. If you're building a raised bed, let me see. Oh, containers. Don't use garden soil or topsoil in a container. Use potting soil in a container. Garden soil or topsoil is just simply too heavy, and things are not going to work out well. Don't reuse potting soil. I like to reuse potting soil, and it can be recycled and reused. Just make sure that if you're growing vegetables in a potting soil in this year, that you don't grow vegetables in that potting soil next year. I like to recycle it and put in some compost, and then I'll grow annuals and things like that in there. If you have a bed, a vegetable garden, don't walk on your soil where you plant. Make your beds so that they're no wider than 4 feet, because you need to reach across them. Put stepping stones down. You really, really don't want to be walking on your soil. And I know it can be hard sometimes, but we want to stay off that soil. We want to make our beds so that we can reach across. We want to make sure that we have pathways between them so that we can work from the pathway. Don't work your soil when it's wet. It's March, typically we would have lots of rain. Typically here we do not have lots of rain. As a matter of fact, the wildfires are burning pretty proud around here right now. But in March, typically the soil is wet. Wait for it to dry out before you work it or turn it over or use a tiller, because you're messing up your soil structure when you do things like that. Use low or no-till practices will also preserve the structure of your soil. So we till once, and then we put the tiller away until the fall. And we hand weed and stuff like that, so we don't have to get that tiller out, because the more you till, the more you just break down your soil structure. Use an organic mulch or cover crops so the soil is never bare during the summertime. Make sure that we're using some kind of straw or other organic material to cover your soil. Listen, if you put the work into the soil, you don't want the soil to blow away, right? So let's put an organic mulch over that soil. And then add organic matter every year, which I think that I will reiterate. Always think organic matter into your soil. So if you're making, I think we've discussed this, when you're making a new vegetable bed, you can, if you're planting in it immediately, organic matter should only be compost. Organic fertilizers are good as well. If you're using a synthetic fertilizer, synthetic fertilizers are going to release their components immediately, where an organic fertilizer is not. So I use organic fertilizers. So I'm going to put that organic fertilizer, I actually put it down in my one bed that I'm going to plant hopefully this weekend. I put it down in February because I want that organic fertilizer to break down and start adding nutrients to the soil. It takes a while for organic fertilizers to break down. Now, if I would have used a synthetic, I wouldn't have had to fertilize until right before, and I would water it in. I put my vegetables into the ground. So this is a listing of cool season. I was talking about spring and summer vegetables. So this is a listing of cool, what we consider cool season or spring vegetables, and sort of a recap of when they can go into the ground and when's their last planting date. Spring vegetables, we have a cutoff date at which we can get them into the ground, because they'll mature during the heat of summer and they're not going, sometimes they won't produce, sometimes they'll produce once. But if it gets too hot for a spring or a cool season vegetable, um, they may bolt, which means they'll send up a seed head. And when they send up that seed head, they're done. They're not going to produce anymore. So we want to get our spring vegetables into the ground during the spring. And then we got that cutoff date, we don't plant them. So spring, let's say spring peas, I really have to get those into my ground right now in the next week or so. Because typically here at the end of April, it just gets too hot for them to do much. I'll get my production in early May, but then it gets too hot and they just burn up. Basically, they just burn up. So these are our spring vegetables. And then we have our summer vegetables. And on this list, we can see that tomato, pepper, eggplant are going to go in as transplants. Beans, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, they can go into your garden as seeds. I know a lot of people like to buy their cucumbers and squash and melons and stuff as transplants, but I'm going to tell you that if your soil is warm enough, typically those things will germinate in about 3 or 4 days if your soil is warm enough. So to me, the expense of buying it as a transplant versus just putting it as a seed makes sense for me. If you don't have the seeds, great. I have a neighbor over here. She buys transplants of squash, and I always say, like, you can put those into the ground. They'll be up in about 3 or 4 days, right? She does what she does. We all have our methods. It's all good. We talked about rotation of the vegetable families. These are actually the families. Nightshades includes tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, and Irish potatoes and eggplants. We have you cucurbits, which are your cucumbers, squash, your winter and summer squash, pumpkins. So all of those are in one family. We have your brassica family, which is your cabbage, your broccoli, kale, turnips and collards, which are typically cool season vegetables. Peas, your spring peas, snap peas, snow peas, carrot family. Now I like the carrot family, not because I necessarily like carrots, because I don't. I just can't do the carrots. I can do them every once in a while. I've tried growing them. I actually had better luck growing them in Northern Virginia I do here, and I have sand here. It totally befuddles me why I can't get carrots to grow here. And I'm not a big fan, so I'm like, nah, we're not doing carrots anymore. But I like the family because you have parsley and you have some of this small flowered, we'll call them companion plants. And they're excellent for bringing in beneficials. So, if you have even chives, which they go to the small family, the small flowers, and they have the umbrils. They're just so excellent for bringing in beneficial insects into your garden. The onion family, the goosefoot family. I'm a Swiss chard person, love Swiss chard, 3-season vegetable. Here it's more of a 2-season vegetable because it gets too hot during the summertime. But I'll plant it in the spring, I'll harvest. Summertime, I'll just harvest enough just to keep it going and water it to keep it going. And then in the fall, I'll get production out of it again. And usually here until December, I can get production out of that Swiss chard. And then the sunflower family, which is your lettuces. So these are some, yes.
I just want to let you know we're getting close to the end of our.
Okay. All right.
I don't know how many more slides you have. I know you said you could talk for days. You could talk for days if given.
I could. I'm used to talking. So
I have a bunch of questions for you.
Okay.
From people. So
we'll go. Yeah. So I just thought, so the time. So let's go ahead and take the questions because I don't want to keep anybody longer than they need to be kept.
I know you get so engrossed in it. I thought I would give you a little heads
Yeah,
up.
that's good because I will. I'll go on for hours.
So the first question I have is from Soren, who says, "We're new gardeners and got a little overexcited and picked up a couple cold frames. Is starting tomatoes in those early usually successful, or do you recommend starting, sorry, or do you recommend starting anything else in those or other ways to use them?"
I mean, cold frames are very functional. So, some of your plants that you would put into, cool season plants that you would maybe put into your garden in April, you could be started in cold frames just to give them a head start. Tomatoes, tomatoes, you could start them from seed in the cold frame. You should do fine. Peppers should do fine. Just make sure that you're watching that sun though, because that sun can get pretty intense. And if you get these little things popping out, it could burn them up. So make sure you're venting that cold frame. But yeah, you should be able to get some summer vegetables started in it.
Awesome. The next question is, we are doing container gardens. Does Denise have any recommendations for potting soils and recommendations for things to put on the bottom of the containers to take up some space? They are deep.
Yeah, I know. And everybody likes to say put gravel or foam or this or that. I'm going to tell you though, you're going to get a perched water table if you put anything on the bottom of containers, because you don't want to fill it with potting soil. In potting soil, I would go with a good quality potting soil. By good quality, I mean one that's a little bit more expensive and that has some moisture retention in it. I have a favorite, um, and it's the Blue Miracle Grow potting soil with water retention. It is absolutely hands down my best container soil. That doesn't say that some of the others can't be used. It's just the one. It's in the blue bag, and I know it's Miracle Grow. I don't specifically know what it is. It's not the green bag Miracle Grow. That's my favorite. As far as, we don't want to spend all that money to put it in. I would say, unless they're self-watering, if they're self-watering, good for you. Get a self-watering container, but use the bottom of that space to make it a self-watering container. There's some things online that you can go into, that will take up some of that space. But I do not recommend ever filling a bottom of container with gravel or any of that stuff. It's actually going to do worse for your plant.
Next question is, we're down a slope with a fair amount of shade from both the trees and house. Is it still reasonable to try and put in a garden?
Uh, if you're on a slope, boy, it's gonna be tough. Because if you're going downhill, water's going to run off too quickly. Um, I would do whatever you can to maybe level out your garden a little bit. Maybe if you do a raised bed, you could make one end higher. But a slope, even a slight slope, and I have experience in this, can be a real challenge to overcome. I would maybe go online and see if there's some good recommendations there. And then if you have large trees, uh, how much shade are they throwing over that garden as well? If that's your only place to put it. So really weigh those, and it's probably gonna cost you a little bit of money. So you may want to reconsider and maybe go with containers.
Okay. The next question is, what are some good ways to keep away groundhogs, chipmunks, and slugs?
Yeah. Groundhogs, good luck with that deal. So in Northern Virginia, I had Bucky the groundhog, haunted me for years. And that groundhog, I lived in Leesburg, and that groundhog knew that I couldn't shoot it, couldn't kill it, couldn't trap it. And it haunted me. And there was crazy Denise running around her yard with the broom trying to get the groundhog out of her garden. Fencing for groundhogs. If you go online and say How to fence for groundhogs. They're going to tell you how to. You don't make it straight. It has to be like a wavy groundhog. Like, so if the groundhog climbs on it, it's like going, oh my gosh, I'm going to fall over. It can't get into your garden. I'm serious about this. So the fencing goes out this way at the top. Snails, snails and slugs, it's wetness. There are some like diatomaceous earth that can be recommended in certain things, but basically, slugs are going to be where it's wet. And so there are a few things that you can do, pretty harmless to pets and things like that. But I would check out diatomaceous earth and see if it's going to meet your needs.
Next question is, does Denise have any opinions on bug netting and bird netting for container gardens?
I use row cover, I use bug netting, I use shade cloth, I use it all. Now, bird netting, I'm going to tell you, if you're putting it over anything, I used to have to use, or tried to, I will say, use it for my tomatoes because in Northern Virginia, because the squirrels just killed it. They'd wait till you're looking at your tomato, they're looking at your tomato. Oh, it's ripe. Go out. Squirrels got it. And they would take a bite out of it. That's what used to just kill me. So I would throw some bird netting over it to keep the squirrels out. Kept the squirrels out, but it also kept me out because it gets snagged on your bushes and stuff like that. So if you have a squirrel issue, I would maybe look into getting a summer weight row cover, which you can get online to cover whatever you need to cover. And with pollination and things like that, you have to be a bit careful. Tomatoes don't need to be pollinated, so you could cover it up, especially when your tomatoes are almost ripe or when your produce is almost ripe. But look into summer weight road cover and the ways to use it. Bug netting, I use it successfully down here. Love it. Put it over my cabbages down here. Plant my cabbages, put it over my cabbages, and it stays over my cabbages until my cabbages mature. Of course, I also run irrigation so that I don't have to lift it off. But yeah, bug netting is good. I like it.
Sarah says, thank you so much for this great presentation. I've been gardening for about a decade, but the veggies I consistently have trouble with is, the veggie I consistently have trouble with is zucchini. I get relatively large, healthy looking plants, but then very little fruit production throughout the season. I've tried various manual pollination methods, aggressive pruning, and growing vertically in containers. Do you have any suggestions for what else I could try to hopefully help boost production this year? Thank you again.
So if you're having pollination issues and you think it's a pollination issue, because you're hand pollinating, so my thing is, if people who consistently have problems with squash not being pollinated, or they think it's not being pollinated, is grow some companion plants around the plant, not maybe necessarily in the bed, but if you have a perennial garden nearby, or if you have annuals nearby, what you're trying to do is to draw in the bees, and you're trying to draw in your pollinators. So, go around your bed or your container, put in lots of annuals or perennials with flowering things, some of the native plants, to draw in those pollinators if you think it's a pollination issue. Now, also make sure that it's not a sun issue, because we need 8 hours of sun on that too. So sometimes it can be a sun issue.
All right, I've got 2 questions left and then we're going to wrap it up.
Right.
This question is, should the leaves be left as is on our veggies? For example, the cucumbers were under their leaves. Should we ever cut back? Thank you.
Yes. So the cucumbers the cucumbers from last year I'm getting are underneath your leaves. So veggie garden debris should be cleaned up at the end of in the fall. You should never leave any vegetable garden debris in your vegetable garden, simply because What did you just, if you do that, what you're doing is you're making a vacation, a winter vacation spot for all the insects which infest those vegetables. So always clean up your vegetable garden debris. Do not leave it in your vegetable garden, especially when we're talking tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, cucumbers, because you gave all those insects a nice little warm winter home. So I would take off your leaves. You've left it in the garden now. I would just turn it all in. It should be decomposed by now. But that would be my thing with that if I understood the question correctly.
And last question, I'm going to grow asparagus in a 1-foot raised bed. One source suggested to till the native soil under the bed to give the asparagus a bit more depth. What, do you agree?
So your raised bed, I'm assuming that you've made your raised bed at least 6 inches high. Asparagus doesn't need that high of a bed, but it should be at least 6 inches high. It depends on what your native soil is, because if I were to try to make a raised bed in Northern Virginia, in the place where I was living, I couldn't even get a tiller into that ground. So if you think you can get a tiller in there, I'd say sure, go ahead, but I don't think it's that necessary to do that if you're filling it with a topsoil compost mix to fill up your raised bed. I think the asparagus grow out versus down, but if you can, sure, why not? You could even get some of that tilled into what soil you're putting into your raised bed. If you can do it. You don't need an ice pick.
All right. I've got lots of thank yous. I got somebody who said they had a notebook full of things they wrote down from here. Everybody's very appreciative. So informational. Denise, thank you so much.
You're welcome.